Some 30 years ago when I first heavily covered this topic, it was in the 1992 World Series. Toronto Blue Jays were playing against Atlanta. Two major problems with that series. In Game 6, Jane Fonda, the then wife of Braves owner Ted Turner, was literally seen in the press box or the Turner box praying against the Toronto Blue Jays, thinking that God was going to will the Braves enough to make them lose in Game 6. But of course, the second big controversy was the Tomahawk chop and the chant that may have started when Deion Sanders showed up in Atlanta a year before, especially during their playoff run against Minnesota. Now, it really came to a head this week because in Game 4 of the Braves-Astros World Series 2021, a certain white supremacist former president of the United States, I'm not going to use his name, you know who we're talking about, rhymes with rump or dump. He was doing the chop along with the rest of the fans and the Tomahawk chant just to draw attention to the fact that, I still appeal to white supremacists. But that's not the point of the story. Today we're going to look at the background to the chop, how it started, and the impact it's had over the last 30 years. Now, this article is being repeated, a narration of a strong write-up done by Edward Sultanen of the Sporting News, and covers a lot of the bases, and maybe gives a view of where both sides of the coin stands. Now, in the write-up, he said there's been a better reckoning in the sports world as of late. The Washington Redskins have changed their name to the Washington Football Team as they examine new name options. The Cleveland Indians will be known as the Cleveland Guardians in 2022, and high school teams across the United States and Canada are renaming their athletic programs from other North American, Native American tribes as well. One, unfortunately, that has stayed in place has been the Atlanta Braves. Not only the name, but the tradition of the Tomahawk chop. The chop has been part of the team's home games for about 3 decades, with fans echoing a chant as they rock their arms back and forth in a chopping motion. Now, to put in perspective of this, the Braves have been part, they started as the Milwaukee Braves, moved to Atlanta. By my knowledge, there was very little Native American negativity with the games. For most of the 70s and 80s, the Braves had a nice color scheme, a blue motif. They didn't really show too much of the original Milwaukee Braves style, but for whatever reason, the Tomahawk came back with this series. Now, perception of the chant by many is divided between those who view it as a camaraderie among Braves fans in the stadium and others say it's racist and an inaccurate depiction of First Nation culture. Now, with the World Series now in Atlanta, the Sporting News is taking a look back at the history of the controversial chant and the efforts that have been made to potentially be rid of it. Now, how did the chop start? There have been conflicting narratives on when the Tomahawk chop began in Atlanta. Some say the arrival of former Florida State Seminole Deion Sanders to the Braves spurred it on. Others say it had been going on before that. We all know that Florida State does the chant and the chop, and their logo is a very akin to what they call a spear motif on the helmet. In truth, it is a bit of both. According to a 91 article in the great publication, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, organist Carolyn King said she'd been playing the tune that accompanies the chop for 2 seasons prior because she felt the sound was going to go with a team called the Braves. She noted that it began to pick up popularity at the end of May 91 and that it went from only a few people getting to the chop to a large portion of the crowd. This is where Sanders and Florida State come in. In 1991, South Florida Sun said in an article, Miles McRae, then the Braves Director of Promotion and Entertainment, said the Tomahawk chop terminology is definitely Braves, but noted that the chant itself began at Florida State. Now, during spring training in 91, a few Florida State fans began to swing their arms in a chopping motion, according to a 1991 New York Times article. That prompted more fans to pick up on it, and during the season, toy Tomahawks were brought to games. Now, during the Braves' postseason run that year, the Times reported that full number of Tomahawks were made and sold around the area for fans to take and swing inside the stadium. Now, in their October 91 New York Times article, Braves Director of Public Relations Jim Schultz was quoted as saying that the team had received complaints that the Tomahawk was demeaning to Native Americans, but defended it by saying the team viewed it as a proud expression of unification and family. This was not a viewpoint shared by everyone. When the Braves reached the World Series to face Minnesota, Native Americans protested in Minneapolis before the start of Game 1. Now, according to an article in the New York Times, American Indian Movement representatives had hoped to meet with officials with the Braves and MLB to discuss renaming the team and cooling the fans' chant. MLB Commissioner Fay Vincent said it would be inappropriate to deal with it now. I will pay attention to the issues, Vincent said, according to AP. We will need more education and we'll discuss it after the World Series. Now, protest organizer Klein Belcourt, AIM's national director and founder, said that he wanted Braves owner Ted Turner to put a halt to the ignorant, stupid, racist behavior and suggested other names for the team would be considered just as abhorrent, according to the Washington Post. I'm sure they wouldn't call the team the Atlanta Bishops and hand out crucifixes to anyone that comes into the stadium. How about the Atlanta Klansmen? They could hand out sheets to everyone who comes in. They would never call the team the Atlanta Negroes, Belcourt said, according to Post. This is the way we feel when you see the chants, the war paint, and the tomahawks. They, Braves officials and fans, are totally scholastically retarded about Native American culture. Like everyone else, they have a John Wayne attitude about Indian culture, tradition, and history, and they're ignorant to the racism that's going on. Now, the controversy hasn't gone away. It was sparked again most recently in 2019 when the Braves and Cardinals face off in the NLDS. Cardinals reliever Ryan Helsley, a member of the Cherokee Nation, said he felt the Tomahawk chop was a misrepresentation of the Cherokee people or Native Americans in general, according to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It just depicts them in a kind of caveman-type people way who aren't intellectual, he said. They're a lot more than that. It's not me being offended by the whole mascot thing. It's not. It's about the misconception of us, the Native Americans, and it devalues us and how we're perceived in that way or used in mascots. As bad, the Redskins and stuff like that. The Braves issued a statement in response to Helsley's comments, according to a Post-Dispatch. We appreciate and take seriously the concern of Mr. Helsley and have worked to honor and respect the Native American community through the years. Our organization has sought to embrace all people and highlight the many cultures in Braves country. We will continue to evaluate how we activate elements of our brand, as well as the in-game experience, and look forward to a continued dialogue with those in the Native American community once the season comes to an end. Now, the Post-Dispatch reported that fans were encouraged to do the chant ahead of Game 2 and that foam tomahawks were still out in force. When the series returned to Atlanta for Game 5, however, the tomahawks were removed from the seats, according to a report from the Post-Dispatch. Now, the Braves did not have to worry as much about the Tomahawk chop returning to Truist Field in 2020, as fans were not allowed in the ballpark during the regular season during the height of the COVID pandemic. It did return at the start of the 2021 season. According to Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Braves encouraged the chop to return during the season opener. Report stated that the team displayed digital image of the chop and prompted the fans to make the chant during pivotal moments of the game. This display has continued throughout the postseason, with the gesture drawing attention particularly during Braves games when broadcast cameras have turned to show fans. Now, before the start of the World Series, Illuminative, a Native American-led nonprofit that seeks to provide visibility to Native people and challenge narratives around them, said in a statement that the Braves and their fans continue to use racist imagery, chants, and logos that depict Native Americans in a dehumanizing and objectifying manner, according to Native News Online. For decades, Native communities have urged professional sports teams to stop using us as mascots, to stop reducing us to caricatures, and yet the Braves have continued to turn a blind eye to our calls for justice and equity. All season, we watch Braves fans use the tomahawk chop and chant racist remarks. This is unacceptable. These actions by the fans, encouraged by the team and its leadership, perpetuate the dehumanization of Native Americans and reinforce stereotyping and prejudice among non-Native people. The Braves organization has caused harm and created an unwelcoming environment for Native peoples. Now get this, at a press conference for the World Series, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred, not the smartest bulb on the tree, said the Braves' name is different than others that have been changed. According to Washington Post Chelsea Janes, it's important to understand that we have 30 markets around the country. They aren't all the same. The Braves have done a phenomenal job with the Native American community. Manfred said, per Janes, the Native American community in that region is wholly supportive of the Braves program, including the chop. For me, that's kind of the end of the story in that market. We're taking into account the Native American community. Now, on Wednesday, Fawn Sharp, president of the National Congress of American Indians, issued a statement in response to Manfred's strange comments, saying the NCAI has made clear with the Braves that Native people are not mascots, and degrading rituals like the Tomahawk chop that dehumanize and harm us have no place in American history. The name Braves, the Tomahawk adoring the team's uniforms, and the Tomahawk chop that the team exhorts its fans to perform at home games are meant to direct and caricature not just one tribal community but all Native people, and that is certainly how baseball fans and Native people everywhere interpret them, Sharp said in a statement. Now, the idea of understanding the Aboriginal community and what Sharp said. The league and team have an obligation to generally listen to tribal nations and leaders across the states about how the team's mascot impacts them. NCAI, a consensus-based Congress composed of hundreds of tribal nations from every region in its country, has made its categorical opposition to Native-themed mascots abundantly clear to sports teams, schools, and the general public for more than 5 decades. In our discussions with the Braves, we have repeatedly and unequivocally made our position clear. Native people are not mascots, and degrading rituals like the Tomahawk chop that dehumanize and harm us have no place in American society. The NCAI calls on the team to follow the example set by the Cleveland Guardians, and we call on Major League Baseball and Fox. That's a white supremacist channel, if ever there was one, to refrain from showing the Tomahawk chop when it performed during a nationally televised World Series game in Atlanta. Now, from my perspective, full disclosure, I'm Acadian Métis. My background is Mi'kmaq and some Maliseet on both sides of my family. I only discovered my full Native background until I was a teenager. Now, as a journalist, I have to be objective, of course, but there's no objectivity in this. If the New York team was called the Jews and people were throwing latkes onto the field, that would be degrading the Jewish people. You wouldn't see the New Haven honkies. You wouldn't ever see the Syracuse senoritas. It just seems like all the bullshit with team names, the last is left is Aboriginal depictions. For whatever reason, the United States to not only to show lack of respect for minorities, they have to further demean them to keep them all the way down. See, Aboriginal people, if there was a terrorist group, Aboriginal people were not like, we don't believe in killing Whitey. Whitey does enough to kill himself. But you got to understand that one of these days, what goes around comes around. Now, I call on this. I'm not watching the World Series. I'm not covering any of the games besides this. I call on Sportsnet and whoever is showing the Fox News games in Canada to provide a disclaimer for the start of the game, said this broadcast contains content that depicts Aboriginal people in a negative light and would be objective be disruptive to some. Viewer discretion is advised. You can't ban the games, but I think there should be, every Atlanta game should have, home game should have a disclaimer. May contain negative imagery or racist imagery. Now, the former president showing up in Game 4, he was just looking at publicity. He's not the story. He just what he called piggybacking on the latest stuff. But this goes way back. Like I said, I don't want to be doing the same story in the Atlanta Braves like I've been doing for the last 31 friggin' years. Okay? It's like Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. Until you really know the background of a person, you can allow them to get away with more of it. Racism is subtle. Racism is a hammer. Sometimes racism is a nail. Sometimes racism is a feather. But when you make it to first base and you have all the people doing a chop like that, you ever wonder why Atlanta doesn't have many players from Canada on their team? Because no Canadian would put up with that, because the majority of Canadians are either know a First Nation person, are a First Nation person, or are non-status, because the majority of people in the Maritimes have status within their group, their ancestry, or their region. I think it's like 80% in the Maritimes, at least, because of the connection with the Acadian communities, the Eastern Métis, and the Quebec Acadians that are throughout the basin. All I'm just saying, if you're a 12-year-old kid listen to these podcasts, read up about this, and ask Dad, if your dad's a sensible person, or your mom, saying, why are they still doing this? You know, this has hurt baseball for so many years. It maybe helping Atlanta, but I wouldn't trust Atlanta to be the what do you call the mental strength of the United States. Atlanta's very stubborn. You know, look at what they did with the Olympics, how they messed up not cheering on all the athletes. You only want the Americans to win. The Donovan Bailey controversy alone shows how things are messed up in Atlanta. And don't forget, that's Atlanta is the corporate entity of Coca-Cola. That sums it up right there. So, you know, at least with the NFL they're trying. Major League Baseball doesn't try too hard, does it? So that's the story of the history of the Tomahawk Chop and the Chant. If you like what we're doing here, give us a like, comment, and subscribe. If you don't like what I'm saying about fighting against racism against Aboriginal people, I don't want you on this channel. Delete yourself. Nobody's going to be allowed to make a comment on this podcast because what I'm saying is the correct thing. There's no debate. If you take the other side, find another podcast channel, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Have a good day. Bye.